Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the top chase uniques in Path of Exile 2 so far. This is the second video in a series, but you don't need to have watched them in order, so the first video is still up. I'll put a link to it at the end of this video. I do quickly need to say one thing though that's been a very recent discovery the player base have made in the last couple of days about the way that Vaal Orbs work when applied to a unique item. Now, I discussed how Vaal Orbs work in some detail in a previous video, but just a quick clarification, there are 4 possible outcomes when you Vaal Orb a unique item. The first one is that there's no change, it just gets a corrupted tag. The second one is that the item gains an additional socket, if that would be allowed on that particular item base. The third outcome, which is pretty much always positive, is that it gains an enchantment. And the fourth outcome, which is usually the one people want to see, is that the numerical modifiers of the item are scaled by up to 22% in either direction. Now, the new discovery is that when you roll this last effect, what a lot of players are starting to term Krangle Divining the item, this also changes the numerical modifier before scaling it by 22%. So it's like applying a Divine Orb first, then further scaling it by up to 22%. There's a bunch of testing that's going on to work out the exact numerical chances of various things that could happen, and we definitely do not know everything about the way Krangle Divining works, but likely this will be cracked in the next week or two. Anyways, that's going to be important when we talk about a couple of these items, particularly when we get to Hand of Wisdom in Action, which is a breach-themed unique that is extremely strong, but that can be pushed quite a bit beyond its normal limits through the use of an extremely lucky Vaal Orb. So let's start with Prism of Belief. This comes from the Arbiter of Ash, and it's not available on the base version of the fight. You will need to be increasing the difficulty of the fight for it to drop. Some sources indicate that this is available from Arbiter +2, other sources say only Arbiter +4, and I think we'll get some absolute clarification on that over time. Prism of Belief is a hyper RNG item. This item always drops Corrupted, which means that it is immune to having a Divine Orb applied to it. Now, what Prism of Belief does is it chooses a skill at random from pretty much every skill in the game, and it adds 1, 2, or 3 levels to that skill. Clearly, you can see that if you can get +3 in conjunction with a meta skill, you are sitting on one of the very best items in the game, especially given that this is only going in a jewel slot on your tree, which is not the most powerful equipment slot in the game. For instance, you might be happy to wear this even if it took up your glove slot, but it's in a less important slot than your glove slot, and so it's even better. Prism of Belief is still very usable if you get +2 to the level of a meta skill, or if you get +3 to the level of something that's off meta but good enough to use, something like Frostwall. And then it's all downhill from there. I think what Grinding Gear Games have gone for with Prism of Belief is trying to create an item where the best versions of it pretty much won't exist, but chasing after them is always a reward for completing the Arbiter of Ash. That's what they've gone for here. Time will tell whether this is something that people definitely chase after, or whether it's something that they think, you know what, I'm going to live without that because it's probably not going to exist until Trade League is 6 weeks old. Second, we're going to look at Dream Fragments. Dream Fragments is arguably the best of the Drop Anywhere uniques in the context of the current metagame. Now, this provides a decent amount of resistance to cold resistance, and also you cannot be chilled or frozen. This is a substantial defense in Path of Exile 2, and it's something that's much harder to come by than the equivalent stat would be in Path of Exile 1. Additionally though, this provides a staggering amount of both maximum mana and also mana regeneration rate. What you're getting here is essentially 4 stats you really want, all squeezed into one package. It is very important with this item that you catalyze it for increasing the mana, because that will scale both the maximum mana percent and also the maximum regeneration rate. Then after that, a lot of people are applying Vaal Orbs to this item, chasing those Krangle Divine results, where you could conceivably see the maximum mana hit as high as 28% if you already have 20% maximum mana and then you roll really well on it. In fact, I can't rule out the possibility that you might be able to get 29%. It's just that there's none of those listed for trade at the time that I'm recording this video. One other thing that comes up with Dream Fragments, because this is a Drop Anywhere unique, it is something that can theoretically be created through the use of an Orb of Chance. This means that if you get a Sapphire Ring that is normal rarity, I would strongly encourage you not to apply an Alchemy Orb to it, not to apply a Transmutation Orb to it, not to apply an Essence to it, but instead to apply a Chance Orb to it. You'll probably end up getting nothing, but there is a tiny chance that you'll end up being very rich if you do happen to hit a Dream Fragments with that. Or alternately, if you're not interested in taking a long shot, then list your sapphire rings for trade. They will sell for several exalted orbs to someone else who is determined to try and live this dream themselves. The next item I wanted to call out is another Arbiter of Astrop. Now, Morior Invictus is not a chase unique in the sense that it's not super expensive, but this is just a really good all-around item that will definitely find a home for a lot of players. Now, there are 21 different versions of this unique, and some versions of it are quite valuable. Now, there's 21 different versions of this item because there are 7 different modifiers that it can have, and it picks 2 of them at random. It always gets a boost to armor, evasion, and energy shield, and in fact, it's a little bit of an unusual base in that it has all 3 of them on the base anyway. And it also always has a hidden mod that causes it to have 4 different rune sockets on it. This can be increased to 5 through a lucky Vaal orb as well. But then it has 2 of these modifiers. One of them that's particularly interesting is +10 to Spirit, which can be scaled up to 12 through the use of a lucky Krangle Divine from a Vaal orb, +10 to Spirit per socketed rune or soul core. So this is an item that can solve a lot of problems on a build, and it's also one that can have a fair bit of power. But let's face it, we're in a meta where increased item rarity is completely and utterly broken, and if you can get increased item rarity per socketed rune or soul core, and also potentially even get it with Spirit or something else that's beneficial like the Resistances mod, then you can get a truly ridiculous Morior Invictus indeed. And these are going to be the best of them, especially if you get even luckier than these people did, and instead of Krangle Divining it, you end up going +1 socket. Then at that point, you can potentially get 50% rarity, plus an additional 50% rarity if you were to socket in 5 of the runes that grant +10% rarity as well. And you can have a chess piece that provides moderate defenses, but on top of that provides 100% rarity, which is one of the most broken stats in Path of Exile 2 at the moment. So from a boss drop to a drop anywhere item, today we've got Astramentis. Astramentis is a carryover from Path of Exile 1, much like Dream Fragments, much like Headhunter that we covered in the last video, and Astramentis does basically exactly what it does in Path of Exile 1. The thing is that in Path of Exile 2, the game is much more stingy with attributes, and as a result, Astramentis is just far better than it was in Path of Exile 1. In Path of Exile 1, it was a really good leveling item. In Path of Exile 1, it was something that did occasionally find endgame use, but in POE 2, this is simply one of the best items in the game. Astramentis is something that always requires attribute catalysts on it. This is something that's a trivial cost, but one that must be paid because the item is just so good, and it becomes so much better when it's got those attributes on it. Otherwise, there's not really much to say here other than that this is definitely one of the rarest drop anywhere uniques in the game. Some people speculate it is the rarest. I don't think that's the case. I think it's the same as a number of other uniques, but that there's just more demand for Astramentis and for Dream Fragments, and so they seem a bit rarer. There's less of them on trade. But other items like Calm's Heart, Erisvane's Wings, these items are less sought after, but they do seem to be equally rare. At least that's my reading at the moment. We'll learn more about how item rarity works in Path of Exile 2 over time. And next, from Astramentis to one of the things it's best with, Hand of Wisdom and Action. Now this is one of those items that has tremendous potential synergy with a very lucky Vaal orb. Hand of Wisdom and Action has 4 modifiers on it, and it's worth noting this is something that I misread the first time I looked at it, because my Path of Exile 1 brain immediately thought, oh, Hand of Wisdom and Action, that's a claw, that's equipped in your weapon slot, isn't it? And I looked at the item and I was like, why does anyone want this? And then I realized, oh wait, nope, they changed it to gloves in Path of Exile 2. So this is a set of gloves. Keep that one in mind, especially if, like me, you've got Path of Exile 1 brain. Now, this has a fair chunk of dexterity and intelligence. On its own, this wouldn't be enough to equip it, but there's a lot of synergy with that and the rest of the item. But then we have the real killers. 3% increased attack speed per 25 dexterity. This counts your character's entire dexterity. It's not just the dexterity that comes from Howler. And then 1 to 10 lightning damage to attacks added per 10 intelligence. So if you've got 150 intelligence and 150 dexterity on your character, then this is going to give you 18% increased attack speed and a whopping 15 to 150 lightning damage to attacks, which is something you just can't really get that sort of amount of flat damage in Path of Exile 2 easily. Now, this is something that can be scaled further through the use of a lucky Vaal orb that Krangle Divines the item. So, if you have a look here, you can see that you can get 4% increased attack speed per 25 dexterity. This seems to be quite a rare outcome, and we're still working on exactly how rare this is. Additionally, you can also get 1 to 12 lightning damage to attacks per 10 intelligence. Now, getting both of these at the same time, that is extremely rare, and that would be an amazing, amazing set of furtive wraps indeed. That's the ultimate dream with this item, and that's the best Hand of Wisdom in action that you can get. There are a couple of them on the trade market, and they're certainly not cheap, and they're the sort of thing that's going to be sought after for a long time, as long as people are interested in using it. So you can see here that there's one listed for 68 divines, another one listed for 74 divines, and potentially there will be more of them down here as well. 75 divines, 80 divines, who knows how high they'll end up getting. Now, of course, this item is best friends forever with Astramentis. Astramentis does, by default, only provide 5 to 7 and 80 to 100 to all attributes. And given how expensive Astramentis is, it is to be expected that anyone that owns this item would divine it to be close to perfect. Not necessarily all the way to perfect, to a perfect 100, but at least all the way to 98 if you're going to equip it. And then after that, you would also be attribute catalyzing it, which is then going to push it up further to 117. After that, there's the option of taking the risk of Vaaling it, but that is a high risk step, especially given that we now know that if it does Krangle Divine, that will forget what the old role was. All that said though, Astramentis is best friends forever with Hand of Wisdom in action, whether you go for the ultimate min-max of a 4% and 12 version, or whether you settle for the baseline 3% and 10. This item's fantastic, and it gets better when paired with Astramentis. That's a tour through 5 more of the unique items that are at the more chase end. I'll also put up on screen now links to the video that looks at 7 other chase items, and also one that looks at 8 unique items that are available on a budget. And I'll leave it there with a plug for my merch store, which I'm going to put 12% off for the 12 days of Christmas, so I'll link to that down in the description below. May your Vaal Orbs have interesting results.